get started. We have a rather full panel as well as a full 90 minutes scheduled for you all. So what we're going to do is a kind of a round robin. This particular session is about feminist bookstores and how we have forwarded lesbian community through our feminist bookstore space. We know that there's a lot of feminist booksellers out there. Many of them are on chat, which are on this Zoom event, which is very exciting. So what I'd like to do right now is to have each of our presenters introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask Faye Williams to unmute herself and let her tell us a little bit first about, tell us your name and the name of the store you worked for and what kind of work you personally were responsible for with your store. Okay.
Hello, everybody. How y'all doing?
Great. How you doing, Faye? Nobody's going to be able to talk back at you, so you'll just have to trust that we can.
Yep.
That we're responsible.
Right. And they can't see me either, and I'm not able to see them because I'm using my phone. That's unfortunate, but I can't pull it up on the computer. But I just want to say I'm really happy to be participating and be one of the panelists. And my bookstore's name was Sisterspace and Books in DC. We were there from 1994 to 2004, and we were a feminist bookstore. My work was really about getting folks excited about literacy in the Black community. A lot of folks did not graduate from high school or middle school. And so my aim was to make sure that the Black community knew that there was a bookstore where they could come and learn as well as teach. So that's what it was about.
Thank you. Pokey. I think you were unmuted. Are you Pokey?
No, I can talk.
Okay, you're next.
Same question. Okay.
Yes.
Should we just say that back in the 70s, when I only knew a few lesbians, we had a little running joke that there were only 65 lesbians in the whole world, and they just kept recycling around. And there's, you know, over 100 lesbians right here today. So I'm really happy to be here. I see lots of people that I know. And so hi to everybody. I'm Pokey Anderson. I was the co-founder and manager of Inklings bookshop in Houston. My business partner was Anise Parker, who later became the mayor of Houston, the first out GLBT person in the top 10 cities as mayor. And now she runs the Victory Fund. And I'm just being a schlub here, and she's all doing all that. But anyway, so our bookstore was open from 1988 to 1998, and we catered to our main clientele was lesbian feminists, but we also had a smattering of everybody else, feminists, progressives, gay men, a little bit of everybody. And we wanted to be a family bookstore. There had been a male-owned shop that had, there was no way you could bring your parents in there. Let me just say that, from the displays and the attitudes and, everything. It was X-rated. So we wanted to be a more accessible place and also build community. And I had a lot of different jobs. I sort of call myself a utility infielder. A lot of different jobs over the years, and I felt like all of the different skills that I learned in those jobs kind of came together as a feminist bookseller.
Okay. And just as I'm getting ready to introduce Carol, Seajay, the garbage truck is going by. So Carol, why don't you introduce yourself, and I'm going to mute myself while the garbage can goes by.
Hello, I'm seeing just incredible numbers of faces and names that I haven't seen for a long time. And I'm going to have this craving to have an email list of everyone who participated. What did I do? I started Well, I sold books for women's liberation conferences, over a book table in the, 69, 70, 71. But I started working at a women's place in 1970, February of 1975, a women's place bookstore in Oakland, which people on the West Coast think was the first full-scale feminist bookstore to ever exist. But, it was all very old time. By the time I got there, they were 3 years old and like nothing exciting was happening. The founding had been exciting, because time was very different then. And then I started Old Wives' Tales in San Francisco in 1976 with Paula Wallace and stayed there till about 82 or 83. And I want to put out a little pitch. I'm looking for Paula Wallace. So any of you who are around Albuquerque or know where she is, please let me know or give my information to her. But someplace in there, Andre and I and many others, Gilda for one, went to the first National Women in Print Conference on the plains of Nebraska at a Campfire Grove camp. And at that, there were about 18 or 19 feminist booksellers there, and we decided to start a newsletter. So I agreed and Andre agreed to do that. So I started doing that in 76, actually a month before I got the Old Wives' Tales open, and did that until about 2000. Is that what I'm supposed to say, Matt? Oh, what did I do? I did everything. It was a feminist bookstore. You had to do everything, and you had to get good at it.
Yeah. So Deb Morris was supposed to be on the call today. She hasn't come along just yet, so we'll give her a few more minutes. My name is Mev Miller. I'm working with the OLOC Zoom team to get a lot of these national Zoom meetings going. I was in the feminist bookstore industry in a couple of different ways. I started off actually working for a wholesaler called Inland, and my job was to get on the phone and to call Pokey and Gilda and every other feminist bookstore I was responsible for, and to sell them lesbian feminist books. So I was an order taker and took a lot of the orders then. But then I moved to Minneapolis and had a very short stint working as a marketing manager for Spinsters Inc. Books when it was in Minneapolis. And then shortly after that, I started working for Amazon, the one true real Amazon feminist bookstore in Minneapolis. And I was there from 1990-ish to 2002. And in that capacity, I was their book buyer. And I also worked with the feminist, I also did volunteering for the Feminist Bookstore News and wrote the academic press column for a number of years, reviewing books for academic university presses. So that's how I come into this. And so let's start with our first question. So many of you have already said what your personal role was, but maybe you could say a little bit more. I know Pokey mentioned this a little bit, but Faye, if you could tell us a little bit about what is the mission of Sisterspace Books? What is it? What was it that your bookstore was actually trying to accomplish?
I guess the vision was, like I said earlier, about literacy within the Black community. And most folks knew that I was, and my partner was also lesbians, and we were proud of that. But we did not open the bookstore for the lesbian community. And we also didn't open the bookstore up for a feminist community. But it quickly became both, and that was a good thing. When people would come to the bookstore, they wanted to know more mostly about us, which I found offensive because that was a private experience that I wanted to keep private. So I was best when they wanted to come in and talk about the number of authors and the different events that we had in the community. And so that made me happy. We were able to work with the University District of Columbia. They helped us with money, which allowed us to bring in Angela Davis and Bell Hooks and all the big names because we could afford their fee. And so when you brought in the big names, more folks would start paying attention to Sisterspace and books. And eventually they would be part of our workshops. And we had workshops on male supremacy. We had workshops on homophobia. We had workshops on energy, financial literacy. We had workshops. And so that was one of the things, one of our outreach from Sisterspace. People knew that we were serious about what was happening within the community. And so, you know, we had a big impact. We had struggles, and we also had a lot of successes, you know. So, yeah, I'll shut up right now. Listen to this.
And Pokey, how about you? Thank you, Faye.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when Anise and I started talking about this over lunch, many lunches, you know, one of the things that came up repeatedly was infrastructure, building an infrastructure for the lesbian community and the surrounding ripples of communities. And, you know, I was doing a radio show at the time directed at lesbian feminists. And we had, you know, softball teams, of course, and, you know, different things. We were also producing women's concerts, but we felt like a bookstore would be a place, a real physical place that people could come with hours and so on, because you can only do so much organizing out of your car trunk, which women are really good at doing. So we wanted a physical place, and it was, you know, partly a community center. We had an upstairs where we were available for community meetings of all kinds. And we, you know, of course, had authors and so on. But yeah, I feel like we did provide a community space as part of an infrastructure to build community.
And Carol.
It's hard to come up with just a few things that were our intention. My favorite line is that we wanted to give lesbians some place to go in the daytime, and something to do in the daytime. And that was certainly true. When I was at a woman's place, the women who had founded it were almost all lesbians from the 40s and 50s. And they wanted to make a space for lesbians, and they kept the store open 365 days a year, and especially Thanksgiving and Christmas, because holidays were when the lesbian community of that era had the most suicides. So they wanted not only a place where every lesbian was welcome, but also they put out a huge buffet, turkey and dressing and the whole thing. And it was a potluck, and people would bring food or they'd show up, and if they ran out, Natalie would go home and make more and bring it. But the idea was to make a space where lesbians were welcome, you know. And I think there's an experiential line between people who came out with feminism and those of us who came out into a different world, and that there's an adamance about providing a safe, welcoming place to the old gay lesbians because of, you know, the suicide rates and what have you at the time. So a space for lesbians was very important. But we were also, and I'll say both Old Wives' Tales and A Woman's Place, we were very committed to overthrowing patriarchy and all of its manifestations. We were very committed to being multicultural, both in our staff and our books, and having everything we could get that was, you know, outside of the basic white narrative. One thing, my commitment, I think, was to meet each woman who came in the door right where she was. You know, she didn't have to have this understanding or that understanding, that there is no politically correct. There's the woman who comes in the door and needs something. And the biggest joy for me was if I could figure out what it was and put some book in her hand that would, she could take that home and just kind of expand a little bit. You know, and she might come back the next week or the next month and need something really different. And it was always about giving women the knowledge and the information they needed to change their lives and to change the world. And I want to echo in another way what Faye said about literacy, because I come from a family where there's 4 children and 2 of us figured out how to read. And you know I read, and 2 did not. So I have 2 siblings who are functionally illiterate. So I understand illiteracy real deeply. And one of my commitments was that there always be things in the store for women for whom reading was not their thing. So we had buttons, we had bumper stickers, we had t-shirts, you know, because a woman could wear a t-shirt that made her proud, even if she couldn't read all those books on the shelves. We had art show, of course we had posters. So there's the literal literacy and working with women who had limited reading to give them books that they could read and understand and not disown them or let them be excluded. But there's also one of the things that was very important to me is what I call a literacy of expectation. In my lesbian coming out, I was fortunate to land with some older lesbians, and, you know, they probably had 10 or 12 books about lesbians. And what I wanted was to teach my whole community to expect there to be books by, about, for lesbians, by, about, for feminists, by, for, about Black women, by, for, about Latinas, by, for, about Native women. That we not only should have those, but we should feel entitled. We should expect those things to happen. And, you know, there are things I can talk about later if we want, but things that we did to foster that expectation. So what else did I want to say? Yeah, I think, you know, our goal was to have something in the store that made each woman who came in feel welcome. And I would extend that we also wanted gay men to come in and be welcome and learn about sexism and how that affected their lives. And we had, you know, straight men who came in, particularly later men that were dealing with, who were counselors and therapists and dealing with a population where women had been sexually abused. And they came in wanting to know, how do I be helpful here? So that was our job, to give people information to go forth and change the world in all these different ways that was unique to them so they could do their work.
Thanks, Carol. I mean, I think you covered a lot of buttons there in terms of like what your favorite thing was, what your mission was, what your expectations are in the community. I would say that for Amazon, ditto all of that. When I started working at Amazon, Amazon at that point was already claiming to be the oldest feminist bookstore in the United States, because by that time, I think Women's Place had closed, Old Wives' Tale. I don't remember if Old Wives' Tale was still open when I started working for Amazon. I don't think so. But at the point when I started working at Amazon, we were at that point in history, the oldest still existing open feminist bookstore. And we kind of wore that with pride. for a lot of years. But I think in terms of how we serve the community, we were also in a university town, so we did a lot of work with various professors and so on in the community who were ordering books for their classes. Was another service that we provided to the community. We also had worked with the local community radio station, and so if we had an author's event, we would try to make sure that the radio station knew about that and would do an interview with the author, so it was not only in our store but also on the radio station, as much wordplay as we can, and then being in having the bulletin boards. I think that was one of the big community services that a lot of folks came into the bookstore. They might not have gone all the way into the store sometimes. They might have just come in to pick up what the current flyer was, or look for a job, or look for, I don't know, somebody to fix their car, or whatever the situation was. So the bulletin boards, I think that was like the big thing when you first walked in the store. That was what you saw before you saw anything else. So that was very popular. And like Carol said, also carrying a lot of resources for folks who don't consider themselves readers, but who really wanted to be in that space and could be in that space, could come and listen to a speaker, or could just come and hang out and listen to the music, because we would play, the music of whatever the sample CD was from Margie or Alex or Chris, or anybody who was sending us music at that time. We would play it in the store so that folks would buy the CD. It was promoting the music, but it was also giving another layer of atmosphere, if you will, to the bookstore. And some of what we're talking about takes us right into the next question: is what do you love most about being a feminist bookseller? What was the thing that really made you happy about being a feminist lesbian bookseller, or in Faye's case, working in the Black community? And what, maybe you have a funny anecdote you might want to share about that. So Faye, let's start with you. Faye, you're muted. Could you unmute yourself, please? Faye? I don't know what happened to Faye. I see her name. There she is.
Okay.
Yeah, we got you.
Yep. What was the question? Sorry.
What did you like most about being a bookseller and working in the community with the store that you started? What were the things that made you the happiest, or that was your favorite parts?
Just dealing with the community. Everybody from the community. We had the elderly group, we had the gay and lesbian group, we had just the whole community came to Sisterspace. It really became a community center. It started out as a bookstore, but it quickly became a community center. So we would have everybody come in, and I would be happy when, a new author would walk in the door, and I'm like, I know you, looking at the picture on the back of her book. Or being happy when, one of the guys would come in and say, Miss Faye, I went and signed up to get a GED and to be able to go to his graduation. Or a lesbian would come in and introduce me to her new partner. That was always a bust. And, so I was most of the time I was there, I was happy about our accomplishments. It wasn't just me, it wasn't about Faye. It was about everybody, the staff who worked there, and the community that came and wanted to use our space. They knew that our space was open to everybody. So, especially the lesbian community, we didn't have like a lesbian house or anything, but they always knew that they could come to Sisterspace and ask for the key. And so they would come and, do whatever they had to do, Most of the young lesbians, and I wasn't part of that, but I always was happy to give them the key and say, clean up before you leave, and hold on to the key until we meet again. So that, that brought me joy. That brought me a lot of joy.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, no, thanks, Faye. That's great. Thank you very much. I know we're at a disadvantage because I can't see your face. But that's okay. How about you, Pokey?
Hello?
Your favorite part?
Oh.
Well, in a way, it was like being in the bookstore was like almost like being at home. It was so comfortable there. people would bring their babies in, and I'd get to play with the babies, and I got to bring my dog to work, and so it was just really comfortable to be there. Thinking back on all the various kinds of ways that lesbians organized and came together collectively, I think a lot of it, for so many years was about being visible to each other, being visible in our communities, and seeing reflections of ourselves back from those other lesbians so that we didn't feel so alone and isolated. We did our group in Houston called Lesbian Health Initiative surveyed 600 lesbians at one point back probably in the 80s. And it wasn't, we said, what are your health challenges? What are your challenges in general? And there were things like isolation, depression, suicidal thoughts, and so on. Much more than the big things that people think about as health challenges like cancer and so on, which of course are with us. And now we have a pandemic. But I think fighting isolation was a big deal, and reflecting our experiences back and forth, so that women's music, Hi Lady Slipper, and Margie Adam, Lesbian Connection, I See You, and so many of the things that we created out of nothing, we just created them to reflect ourselves back, because we were invisible in our community, in the world. Nobody knew us, nobody saw us. So that, I think that was the big picture. The small picture was the babies and the dogs, and handing somebody, as Carol said, seeing where they were and handing them just the exact right book. So.
And how about you, Carol? I think you have to unmute yourself.
What Pokey said, what Faye said, that's all true. I was thinking about, favorite for me, it was just going to the store every morning and seeing what happened, seeing what books came in the mail. It was like Christmas every day, but ever so much better than Christmas ever was, because this was all about us. There weren't any pink ruffly dresses, that came in the mail at the bookstore. So there was that, there was who came in the door, and what they needed, or what someone came in with, a flyer, a poster, this event is going to happen, that thing is going to happen. And I think I'm going to offer two just personal joys. One is, even in 1976, it took a lot of courage for a lot of women to come in, to open that door and walk in. We were in a city, and women would come in and say, you could see the fear on their face when they walked in the door. So of course we're kind to them and tried to make them feel welcome, or ignore them if, someone was trying to be invisible. Then you respected that. We had the lesbian section was kind of behind a file cabinet, so you could go look at the books, but no one could see you from the street. So people would walk all the way around the store and find the lesbian books and hide out behind the file cabinet. But women would say, well, I walked around the block 3 times before I came in, or 5 times, or this is the 3rd time I tried to come to the bookstore, and I finally made it in the door. It was that scary. It was that, because sometimes what that meant for a woman was, I think maybe I'm a lesbian, and if I walk in the door, that's going to mean I am one. I'm going to be admitting something to myself that's just terrifying. Or sometimes it was, I really am a feminist. I want to find out more. Or one of my favorite customers, I mean, was a woman who was being very abused by her husband, and she thought this was a place she could find help, and she did. So it was being with those incredible brave adventures that women brought themselves on when they came to the store, and that was just such a gift to be part of that. And one of my other favorite things is, so we opened, you know, the first full-scale women's bookstore in San Francisco. Full Moon Coffee House had a very little closet space bookstore before us. But so we were doing that, and at the same time, this guy across the street was inventing what we came to know as your classic California burrito. So he's this guy, and you know, he was really old, maybe in his mid-late 40s, and he had his whole family is working there. So his wife, his kids, relatives, everybody is doing this, you know, very Mexican community food store. And of course, we went across the street and got burritos all the time. And one day, this woman came in, and I, of course, said, "Oh, how did you hear about the bookstore?" And she said, "Well, I was getting some lunch in the place across the street, and the guy that was running the cash register, he said, 'Oh, are you here for the bookstore?' And I said, 'What bookstore?' And he said, 'There's this woman's bookstore across the street. Don't you know?' And so he was recruiting customers for us in the same way we were sending people to him to buy lunch. And lots of women would go get a burrito on their lunch hour and walk around the store eating. And so it was that community. Now they call it intersectionality, I think, but it was, we were a community to each other against all odds. You know, we were not the Latino lesbian, we were not the Latino Catholic family. We were supposedly in opposition, but we became community with each other. So that's all those unexpected connections, and all those connections, that's the joy for me.
So I'm sorry, I just got a message that Deb Morse is trying to get in. So Mary Farmer, if you could send the message to Deb that I just resent her the confirmation on her Gmail account. If she wants to go look for the confirmation there and log in, that'd be great. Thank you. Sorry to have to do it in that roundabout way, but sometimes I feel like I'm juggling a circus, which was sort of how I felt about working in the Feminist bookstore a lot. Like I'd be on my way down the aisle to get one thing, and then another person would say, "Well, could you find me this?" And then 4 other people would ask me about the tickets that we were selling. And then, you know, so it was always like, when the store was busy, now there were times when the store was not so busy, but when the store was busy, it always felt like there was many, many things simultaneously going on. And so it was sort of like playing in a circus. And like Carol, I would say for me, I've had a lot of jobs in my life, you know, like go to work kind of jobs, but I didn't feel like going to the Feminist bookstore was a job. Yes, it was work. It was hard work. It was stressful. There were always things that we were worried about, whether it be money or whether that book was going to come in on time for the author event that we were having tonight and the book isn't here yet. You know, those kinds of stresses, or, you know, somebody left weird flyers on the ground or a used dildo in the back of the room. I mean, you know, like crazy stuff would happen all the time. But I never felt like I was going to a meaningless, drudging sort of job. I felt like I was doing something important, you know, and somebody might, I know that there are a lot of folks in the world who look down on retail workers or just don't think that, you know, whatever they think about retail, but I just felt like that was not my experience. That I was going to a place where, I mean, and there were, you know, we definitely had our tiffs among our coworkers, you know, it wasn't like it was all roses and unicorns all the time. So there were certainly things that made the work challenging. But overall, I would say that I actually enjoyed going into the store. every day and seeing who was going to be. And like Carol said, like, wow, opening up this box, I was like, I forgot I ordered that. I must have ordered that 4 months ago and now it's here. Wow, this is cool. You know, or seeing new lesbian authors or new feminist books come out, or knowing that some things were going to create a lot of conversation among the lesbians and the women who came into the store and other people as well. So anyway, I thought that was really one of my favorite parts about working in the bookstore. I don't know, I haven't seen Deb come up yet, so we're still gonna hope that she joins us at some point here. So moving on, I don't know if anybody wants to reflect on if Faye or Carol or Pokey wanna focus on something that somebody just said, but maybe my segue is into, what was the challenging part? I saw a message in the chat asking where the money came from. So I know that money was always a challenge. But Faye, maybe you could talk a little bit about what some of the things were that were challenging for you running the store and in the community where you
are. This is Faye, and the biggest challenge that we had as a bookstore was the landlord. That was the biggest struggle we had. We were we had leased out a building, It was 2,000. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. We had a leased out a building that was 2,000 square feet. And we were there for, I guess, 2 years before we realized that the air conditioning and the lighting had big problems. And we continued to pay the rent, you know, which was $3,500, which was a lot, but it was in a prime area, U Street, 14th and U, 14th and 16th and U, so that's a prime location. And we decided one day, you know, if he did not fix the lights and the air conditioning and, you know, other problems that the landlord was responsible for, we would not continue to pay him. We decided that we would put the money into the escrow account, so it was in the court, and we had a major battle. The good news was that we were represented by some of the best lawyers. We had 3 different firms that represented us pro bono, so we didn't have to worry about paying them. The problem became, you know, after, I guess it was a 7-year struggle. And, you know, after a while you get tired and you get weary, but we continued. And the unfortunate part of it was that we were put out. We had an eviction because the marshals came over and put us out on the street. But, you know, that indicated a lot because we had a lot of support. So it took us like 15 minutes for folks to show up and pack us up. And storage was a block away. So we were able to put the books and all of that in the storage. And that particular day we had a book signing with, you know, I'll just leave the name out, but it was a great book signing. We sold all of his books. And so we came back, you know, to the space at night, and there were women there who were praying, you know, praying that we would be able to come back. And I told them, it's going to take more than praying. It's going to take a real struggle. And so if you want to get in the street and shut it down, we could do that. So, you know, I was disappointed in one way, but in another way, I was happy to see that people really, really appreciated Sisterspace and books for a lot of reasons. You know, it wasn't just because it was a bookstore and they could come in and meet the authors, but it was a space where they could come and really sit down and talk about what was happening, talk about domestic violence, talk about, you know, what's happening within the family as well as what's happening in the community. And so that always made me happy to do that. And in addition to just being an open space, we were able to organize people. So when we had to talk about housing, affordable housing, people would meet at Sisterspace and we would organize and go down to the city hall and protest. Or when they were talking about schools, we had a spot, you know, a black spot. And that was hard to have, you know. And it still is, even where I live right now in Gainesville, Florida. It's still hard to have a building for Black folks so that we can organize. And so, you know, that's another reason why I was always happy, because we had the key to the place. The bottom line, it came to this, that we had to raise, it was 1.8 million. We were able to raise 2.4 million to buy the building. And we found out he really didn't want to sell it. And so, you know, that was a big disappointment. But we raised 2.4 million. And, you know, there was a lot of rumors that we didn't pay the rent. We didn't, you know, do this, that, and the other. So we basically ignored that. But we knew that we had the money in hand. But, you know, he was able to go through the court and, you know, make it happen his way. So that was another big disappointment, because that created additional racial problems. Even though the owner, the real owner, was a Black man who had passed, and the attorney who was representing him was a white man who didn't give a shit about us and made it real clear. And so when you have 2.4 million and you only had to raise 1.8 and you're not able to pass the money on to the lawyer, that tells you a lot. So that's how Sisterspace ended. So I'll stop here.
So when you're reflecting on that, do you think it was because of the kind of store that you were running, or is it because it was a Black bookstore? I mean, what do you attribute?
I think it was both. I think it was both. It was because we were Black, and you know, that whole area has changed. It was part of, you know, it was a big part of our gentrification, you know? I mean, let's be clear what was happening on U Street. You know, if you go there now, you know, I was shocked when I was up there like a year ago, and the only Black folks I saw in the area were 4 Black men. It used to be all Black. And now Black folks who live in D.C., they're moving south because they can't afford to live there. So yeah, it was about this, you know, it goes back to the history of D.C., but in terms of getting rid of Sisterspace and books, and as soon as they got rid of us, we were the strongest ones on that street. Then you go down this next door, next door, next door. And so all of those Black businesses had to leave because we were the strongest ones there. And once we left, everybody else had to move out too. So yeah, it was part of being Black, but it was also part of being a woman, you know, and being a lesbian. You know, it was real clear where what his thinking was. And so we had a big battle.
Yeah. Okay.
Had a big battle.
Yeah. Thank
but
you.
I feel honored in the fact that the community stood with us the whole time.
Yeah.
We had no problems with the community. We had problems with the landlord and the fact that so I won't say that. So, I'll stop.
Yeah.
Some days I need to hold in. Okay.
All right, so I see that Deb has joined us now. So Deb, we're glad that you finally made it on. So right now, what we've been talking, I'm going to invite you to speak at this point. So basically, Deborah is from was with Lammas Bookstore in Washington. So at this point, what we've covered is what was your bookstore? What was your mission? What did you do at your bookstore? What did you like being in your bookstore? So if you want to just start chatting and tell us on Deb Morris and Lammas Bookstore, that'd be great.
Well, hello. I came to Lammas as a customer first, and Mary Farmer, who is in the audience and who is there, we struck up a friendship because I was a customer, and we would talk about books, and we would talk about things that I thought that she ought to have in the store. And so so I started working there on Sundays because she couldn't work 7 days a week, obviously. And I felt the store should be open, and so I started working there then. You know, I worked, I did a little bit of everything, but mainly you know, my favorite thing was, you know, introducing people and, you know, safe for lesbians to come in. I certainly second what Carol about, you know, people sort of coming in and tipping to the back where the lesbian section was, because they didn't be seen. But I also think that, when getting books into the hands of aunts who wanted to talk about sexuality issues with their, fundamentalist, nieces and nephews, who wanted to be able to talk about things that, they knew their, family would never bring up. And, we did things because we were in DC, we, were March Central. People came from all over the country to the bookstore. Carol and some of you could tell you that Mary was very much involved in, we were all involved in women in print, but also in terms of having some kind of presence at information and ideas. So, those were, really important things that we were able to do in the course, certainly of the time that I worked there.
What was your favorite thing to do, Deb? What was your favorite thing about being in a feminist bookstore?
Well, I just, hey, I'm a book junkie. So, anytime I was in a bookstore, I was happy. But it was also, good to be able to see things in there that you were responsible for bringing into the store to share with customers. One of my, since I worked on Sunday, some customers who, might not come in during the week, would come by. I remember the poet Elizabeth Alexander would come by with her mother, Secretary of the Army at the time, I believe. And so they would come in and, she was a teenager. And so we would talk about books, one of my favorite stories is that I was there on a Sunday afternoon and, I was just, there was nobody in the store, I don't think, maybe one person. And Rita Mae Brown came in because she wanted to use the bathroom. She said, hi, there's the bathroom. And that was it, But, I just love, and I love talking to customers, particularly those who were, trying to get information for young people and their families, because, growing up when I did, my sexuality education was, trying to find some dirty book or, listening to some old wives' tale or, something that didn't make sense. So, that's where, that's where I thought we did really important work.
Thank you. So we were just, as you were coming in, Deb, we were just starting to talk a little bit about what were some of the most challenging things about being in the bookstore. And Faye was talking about her landlord and getting evicted and some things along that line. I know that one of the things I wanted to just mention, and many of you may have heard about this, and I know it was something that the team brought up when we were talking about the feminist bookstores, was what happened with Amazon versus Amazon. And I would say that that was one of the biggest challenges for Amazon in the era that I was there. That happened in 1999. The internet was still young and new and nobody really knew about it. And I have this vague recollection of one day in the bookstore, somebody calling and saying, well, so are you guys gonna have a web page and an internet presence and this and that? And I had no idea what the heck this person was talking about. Like, it was just, I was clueless about it. The internet was so new and so few of us knew anything about it. And so I didn't think anything more of it. And then all of a sudden, Amazon, the river of flowing books, showed up on the internet. And I think the most challenging part for us for the longest period of time was people mixing up, you know, like even our own customers come in the store and say, wow, you have this fabulous website. And we're like, no, we don't. So it was excruciating because I was the book buyer and I would get these special orders from some like very obscure technical scientific manual that somebody in Hong Kong wanted. And I was like, what? Like it was very baffling. And so that went on for a long time. And as some of you may know, we actually did sue Amazon.com for the name. It was a grueling many, many months when that happened because we all had to be deposed and talk about our personal lives. And of course, they were digging into our sexuality and what we believed and what we were doing and all the things they do to you in a deposition that's really ugly and nasty. They did all of that. And we finally did settle out of court with them. Well, actually, maybe we went to court once or twice. So it was exhausting because we were all being deposed. We all had to go to court. We were talking to the lawyers all the time. There were pages and pages of legal documents that we had to go through and histories that we had to dig up and things we had to find and were we incorporated and all these kinds of things. So that was our particular tale of woe that was very excruciating. And we did settle with them at the time, which seemed like a lot of money for us, but given the current state of Amazon, we realize that's now just chump change, really. But you know, it was something that we had to go through that was challenging for us. But just the fact that they were using our name, and I think they took that name because they were trying to use the Amazon River as the flowing books thing, and it was at the alphabet so that they would come up on searches higher than anybody else. So I think it was all of those things. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Carol or Pokey, what were your challenging things?
Well, yeah, I certainly appreciate the fight for Amazon, for our name Amazon and those imposters who took it. One of the things that happened pretty consistently was feminists of all stripes were discovering assertiveness, and many were taking assertiveness training classes, and we were, as a community, many of us going from being polite women or women who had learned to keep our mouths shut in order to survive, and suddenly there was this freedom and encouragement to speak out and demand your rights and demand to be noticed. And the safest place for a lot of women to first practice that was in their local feminist bookstore. So, you know, it took me a long time to catch on that there was a certain look in a woman's eye as she came up to the counter to complain about X or Y or Z, some of which were, you know, perfectly reasonable things to complain about, but that there was a particular force and a ritual to it. And what was difficult was, you know, we're here in the Feminist Bookstore. We are not your primary opposition. We are not the most evil people in your lives, but people practiced on us, and that got a little tiring. One thing was that, I mean, I felt like Old Wives' Tales was very financially blessed, a lot because of our location. So we had our local community, we had, you know, the great lesbian migration. So there were always new people coming into the city. We had a really big, diverse community. We had many audiences. So we had relatively good cash flow and relatively good income. that's only relative, you know, and in hindsight, well, I felt like we paid each other as well as we could at the time. And in hindsight, I know that a lot of women who worked in women's bookstores for a lot of years, when it's time to file for Social Security, they have a lot of years with either zero or quite low income. So the amount of Social Security that women are getting is lower because of working for many years at low or, you know, quite minimal appearing wages. And we didn't think 40 years ahead to when we were going to be old. So that's a hard thing. Another thing I would throw out is that part of learning to be feminists was that as women, we'd been told to be grateful all of our lives. And so the word thank you kind of went out of the feminist vocabulary. So it was like, you know, if you did some extraordinary service for someone, she was practicing feeling like that's what she should have. So after I left the bookstore and I started working for Federal Express as a delivery person, and it was like every time I walked into a place with a package, people said, thank you. And they said, have a good day. And it was like, oh, that wasn't what we were getting. I see some smiles in the store every day. I think another challenging part was that we were all learning, and we were learning so fast. And, you know, what I understood in the morning when I was eating breakfast, by the time the end of the day came, I understood 6 different things, and I understood what I understood in the morning differently. And that was true for everyone who came in. So we were always on the cusp of this incredibly new information. And that's what made it so exciting, and it made it kind of exhausting.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Pokey? Any challenges?
Well, first, let me just do a shout out to Lammas Books and Mary and the others who made it possible. Because whenever I was in the DC area, I would always make a trek into DC and see the bookstore. And, you know, that's probably where the seed was planted that, oh my gosh, you know, maybe we could have a bookstore like that in Houston. And, you know, certainly, of course, a shout out to Carol Seajay, who was, as I always said, our den mother for women's bookstores, and made it possible for us to figure out all the arcane things that we had to know about that had nothing to do with loving books, all the nuts and bolts. Oh, and one more thing I wanted to call out. I believe I saw Goldenrod here, somebody from Goldenrod. And so I wanted to say that, as well as Lady Slipper and all the other great people who are here. So challenging, of course, it was to pay our staff. And we never did have a full-time staff person. We only had part-time. And we also couldn't pay me very much. And, you know, shout out to my dad. He helped out in a real regular way so that, you know, I could continue to know where money was coming from. So, you know, you fight patriarchy, but you fight with the tools you have, and sometimes it's your dad. So that's challenging. And I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be a bummer, but one of the hardest things we ever did was know that one of our customers, who was about 5 feet tall and weighed maybe 100 pounds, had walked out of our front door to her car in the back of the store and was abducted at knife point. And long story short, she thought about the daughter. She was an only mom, only parent, and her little girl, and she fought that motherfucker off, and he left. she got the pepper spray off of her keychain and managed to fight this guy off who had a knife, and he left. But it was such a feeling of vulnerability for us, for our customers, for our store, to know that that could happen. And so I'll just say I think that was a hard moment.
Well, thank you for all of that. And I don't want to end on a downer. Just unfortunately, the garbage truck is coming by just as I'm talking. I don't know what it is with the garbage truck today. But what I would like to do is, I'm aware that it's 3:11 and we have just about 15 minutes left on this Zoom. And I want to, first of all, appreciate everyone who joined us. I counted 119 at our most fullest point. So that's very gratifying to know that that many lesbians are interested in this topic. And we've only not even scratched the surface or gotten to the end of everything. But I do want to say that some of you have been chatting away, and we're going to save the chat, and we'll summarize those chat notes and send them to the next OLOC news. I've also put together a resource list. Some of you are asking about what feminist bookstores are still open. They are actually listed on the OLOC website. So if you want to go check there, but we'll also make the resource list available through the OLOC e-news sometime soon too. And what I would like to do now is, I know that we haven't gotten to any of the last questions, but the very last question is what have we learned from all of the bookstores represented here are now closed, unfortunately. But part of the challenge for us is to think about forward with our communities. And so how can we take what we learned into a future of building feminist and lesbian communities? So Deb, why don't we let you start first this time?
Well, I mean, I think obviously forums like this are important. Rose's, articles like Rose's article that was in Sinister Wisdom are important. But, I mean, just being able to let people know, one, that there are stores that are still out there operating. This is Women and Children's first 40th anniversary. Bookwoman just did a fundraising t-shirt, which I had to take off because it needed to be washed. But we need to continue to be in communication with each other and information about that history. That's what I would say.
How about you, Faye? Are you still here? Unmute yourself.
Yep, I'm still here, holding on. I'm optimistic. We're going to have another bookstore, another Sisterspace and Books in Gainesville, Florida. I have a cubicle. It's a cubicle right now. I'm part of Santa Fe. That's the community college. And COVID came along and sort of knocked us back. But as soon as we get rid of COVID, we're going to open up a bookstore. And it's going to be called Mama's Club. And I'm encouraging everybody who's listening right now, please look at Mama's Club. It's a Facebook website saying Mama's Club. And Mama's Club stands for Music, Art, Movement, Action. And when I say movement, I mean political movement as well as dancing. But look at what we have set up. We have 2 events coming up. The first one is on white supremacy, and the second one is on the patriarchy. What is the patriarchy? And we have great speakers, Dr. Simmons, and we have Loretta Ross. So just plug into Mama's Club. So I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful because I'm living in a city where a feminist bookstore is needed. I mean, we have a feminist bookstore here, Third House Press, Third House Books. But we need to have a Black feminist bookstore as well. And that's my plan, is to open up another bookstore. Thank you. And it's been an honor to be part of this Zoom meeting. Thank you so much.
Okay, Pokey, how about you?
Well, I am a Luddite by nature, and you know, the times have changed. Actual books that you hold in your hand have, you know, have to some extent had to move over, have been nudged out by a different kind of book, and communication is different. Obviously, we're on this thing called Zoom, and so I think the challenge for us, many of us in our 60s and 70s and older, is to try to get good at this, and to, especially during the pandemic, to figure out new ways of being connected with each other. And it is a challenge. It's still not a hug, and it's still not having people over to dinner like we would like to do. But we do what we can to stay safe and connected. And so, you know, I am not the tech guru here, but I would just say, you know, keep after it and ask questions, get help to stay connected.
Carol?
I think one of the most useful things that hopefully we've learned is that there's not a right way to do anything. There might be your way, there might be my way, there might be what I learned today, there's what you learned later in the afternoon, but when any of our movements get attached to there being a right way, that's kind of putting the brakes on any kind of movement. So my suggestion is to envelop rather than to be right. I think in this last political climate, it's given me a lot of opportunity to meditate on the concept of bullying. And I think I would love to have bullying separated out from our politics and our urge to have a right way. I think that's one of the most damaging things that I saw and still see as the effects of women on the receiving end of that. But I think the real message is, if you see something, if you want something, if you hope for something, step up and do something. That's what we all did in creating women's bookstores. It's like, I want a place for lesbians to go in the daytime. Oh, let's have a bookstore. We'll sell the books. That'll pay the rent, and we have the space. And who knows what will happen? And that just throwing ourselves into something, you know, I really envy those who are 20 and 30 now. I want to have that kind of energy and resilience and be able to stay up all night to get things done. But we each can do something, and that's the really profound political message to me about feminism, is to do that.
Yeah. And Carol, what you were talking about too, I also think about, there are many times when I think that many of us, and I don't think this is just true for feminist bookstores, but I'm thinking of the publishers, the musicians, the craftswomen, any of us, for any of the kind of work that we're doing that was feminist and lesbian centered. If we knew what we knew going in, we probably wouldn't have started. So many of us went in not knowing what we were doing, not necessarily having all the skills that we needed, needing to find people who had those skills so that we could balance the books or figure out the legal stuff, or, you know, talk to a publisher about how we get their books, or the numbers of conversations we had with authors about how they get their books published, you know, all of those things that we all had. Every day was a learning experience. And we had to go in clear-eyed and, like, you know, with confidence, like, I got this, you know, like, we didn't know what we didn't know. And if we'd have known it, many of us probably would have stopped before we even got started. And I still feel that way. And I want to reflect also on what Pokey was saying about being a Luddite. One of the things that, and I know this came up in conversation when some of you registered and you mentioned things that you were interested in knowing more about, is archiving all these old feminist lesbian books that we have. Now, and before I go there, one of the things I want to say is that one of the things that I truly enjoyed about being a feminist bookseller was getting to know all the feminist booksellers around the country. We had women in print movements. We would see each other at conferences. We would have our own little gatherings and talk to each other about what our challenges were, what our joys were. How did we solve this next problem? What piece of information? How did you get a hold of that musician? How did you get a hold of that author? We would just share that information. The Feminist Bookstore was not only in our local community, but we had a national community that was very strong, the publishers and the booksellers and the musicians and the distributors and everybody. And it was, that part was really heartwarming and fantastic and wonderful, because that's how we all still know each other, because we were connected to each other all the time anyway, partly through Carol's work, partly through Mary Farmer's work. You know, there were many of us who made that effort to stay connected to each other. But part of, you know, also thinking about what do we do with all, many of us probably have bookshelves of Diana Press or Daughters Press or Old Naiad or, you know, many of the old journals, Sinister Wisdom and Lesbian Connection. And I don't know about you all, but I'm a hoarder. I have all this stuff. And so and one of the things that has come up is like, what do we do with all this? Where do we put it? So I know the Sinister Wisdom has an issue coming out relatively soon in the next year or two called On Transfer, where that is part of the conversation. But I'm actively now thinking about my own archive and what I'm going to do with that. And one of the things I have learned in Rhode Island, where I live now, through some librarians I've been speaking to, that there are a lot of young lesbians. And we might think, oh, that old literature, all that old stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s, nobody's interested in it anymore. And what I have found out from talking to young librarians is that there are a lot of young lesbians who are very, very interested in having access to those older materials. And so I would encourage us, that gives me hope, you know. So it's like, oh, okay, so we're not relics from the past anymore. We actually do have something really important to share, even if it's historical, even if it's outdated, even if the conversation has moved around the bend a quadrillion times since then, that we still have some very important things to offer in our old lesbian and feminist publishing and bookselling history is still very much alive and interesting to younger communities. And that gives me hope, and that gives me encouragement to think about what I'm going to do with the 2,000 volumes plus that I have residing in all the nooks and crannies of my house. So
I want to add something to that, Nev. I'm involved with the Old Lesbian Oral History Project, and so from that point of view, and also I do know Lillian Faderman and have kind of heard some of her processes that she's gone through with writing her history books. And I just want to encourage people, if you have stuff from your, whether it's bookstores or getting together, you know, organizational stuff, whatever it is, don't get rid of it until you check with somebody. There are archives that are delighted to get this stuff. I remember specifically when Lillian was writing, I think it was her most recent book, she found a treasure trove in somebody's garage, and she was so excited to get that boxes and boxes of stuff she could go through. So please don't get rid of stuff until, you know, it may look like something you don't need, but check before you get rid of it.
yeah, check with somebody, me or anybody. I'll take it. No, my partner's in the other room saying, no, you don't. So anyway, so I want to just honor our time and make sure that we're wrapping up. I see that there's lots of things going on in the chat. I know that I'm going to unmute Ruth because she wanted to do a little plug for OLOC. So let me just, I'm trying to unmute you, Ruth. I really am.
There, I'm unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it is so thrilling again to see so many women that I know from OLOC and from other places. Most of you are OLOC members, but some of you are not. And I know a lot of the women that registered asked for information on membership, which I found thrilling. I think that doing these Zoom meetings will increase our membership, and that's great. And thank you, everybody. We all want OLOC to stay alive. And unfortunately, we live in the real world, and the way to stay alive for an organization is through money. I hate it, but that's the way it is. So I hope that everybody that loves OLOC, and if you can spare just a few dollars, we don't, not for a big fundraiser that we do, but just because you feel like it or you're glad that we do these things, we really need your money. I just was looking at figures for this month, and this month we didn't do a major fundraiser, so it's way, way down. And we really want to keep sending out the reporter. We want to keep doing some of the wonderful things that we're doing, like the Zoom meetings. So thank you for everybody who helps us out. And it doesn't matter how little. If you have an extra $3, that's helpful too. Thank you.
And we're running out of time, and I had hoped that we would have time to invite some of the other booksellers who are on this Zoom to speak up, but I just wanted to shout out and recognize you. So I see Andre Rivers is here, Beth Dingman from New Victoria Publishers is here, Gilda Bruckman from New Words in Boston is here, Madeline Zadek from Lunaria in Northampton, Mary Farmer from Lammas was on the call, and then other folks, Alex and Margie, Maria Cora, Rose Norman, Judy Stone, and there's probably others who are on the call who I'm missing at the moment, authors and publishers and booksellers and musicians and journal writers and just all of you. I want to thank Carol and Pokey and Faye and Deb so very much for offering your input into this afternoon. We really appreciate you. We appreciate all of you who attended. Like I said, we're going to summarize the chat and send it out in the next e-news. Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone who participated. We hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. Be well. Karen London, Eleanor Batchelder, I see that you are here too. And others whose names are showing up in the chat. So thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Bev.